Okay. Okay. Hello. Welcome, everyone. I am Suzanne Kanawi, Marketing Manager at the American University in Cairo Press. And thank you all for joining us today for our first virtual book talk in 2026. We're very excited for this year's plans. Today, we're discussing Islamic Theology and the Problem of Evil by Safaruk Chowdhury, who's joining us today. Our talk today is expected to be an hour long, and we're going to have room for Q&A at the end. So if you would like to ask questions, please type them in the Q&A box in your Zoom screens or in the chat box. I know some people not necessarily find the Q&A box in their mobile phone, so both are okay. And also, the recording of this talk is going to be made available right after on our YouTube channel, AUC Press. So, to our book today, Islamic Theology and the Problem of Evil. It examines how Muslim theologians have addressed the tension between God's perfect goodness, power, and wisdom, and the existence of suffering in the world. Focusing on four key cases: human disability, animal suffering, evolutionary natural selection, and hell. Our author, Safaruk Chowdhury, explores in the book how classical Sunni thinkers developed different forms of theodicy to explain or justify these evils. The book is now available in paperback in major bookstores and online book retailers worldwide, and I'm also going to be sharing with you ordering links very shortly. We're delighted today to have with us the book author, Safaruk Chowdhury, who is faculty member at Cambridge Muslim College, White Thread Institute in London, and the Ibn Rushd Center for Excellence for Islamic Research in Birmingham. He's currently academic director at the Center of Islamic Knowledge in Canada, and he studied philosophy at King's College London and Islamic Studies at Azhar University, Cairo, before completing his PhD at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. He is currently executive editor of the Journal of Islamic Philosophy and a teacher and examiner in religious studies and history. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Safaruk Chowdhury, and over to you now, Safaruk.
Oh, Susan, thank you so much for that introduction. Sue, thank you as well, and Nadia, and to the team at AUC Press who have been so phenomenally supportive. Throughout the writing of the book, the publication of the hardback, and now I'm delighted about the paperback. So I want to thank you all. My warmest thanks to the team for the support, for the huge support. It's been phenomenal. I have to say something as well. AUC Press had been very, very generous in allowing me to write the book that I wanted to write. And you don't that latitude, that generosity isn't offered to many authors. I mean, anyone who's written a book will know how much chopping and changing, how much demand there are from publishers when it comes to writing a book of this nature. So again, I just want to say I'm so happy, I'm so proud that I've written this book and be allowed to write this book the way that I wanted to write it. And so, yeah, again, thank you, thank you, thank you. So Susan, I'm going to share some slides for everyone, if you don't mind, and then I will talk about, I'll give a sketch of what I want to cover today with you all, and I hope we can have a fruitful discussion session as well. So this is how I envisage the next sort of, let's say half an hour or so, half an hour plus, of today's sort of virtual book talk. I want to talk a bit about like why I wrote the book, what initially got me to write about a subject matter such as this, and then I'm going to give a sketch, an overview of the book, the chapter overview, and then I'm going to go into describing what is the problem of evil? How was it conceived by, medieval Muslims, early Muslims, and looking at some kind of solutions I offer in my book, drawing on Muslim intellectual history and theology. So my initial impetus for writing the book, my motivation for writing the book was twofold. One, I'll mention one odd reason, right? One of them was the problem of animal suffering. Now, I don't own any pets, right? I don't have any pets. I've never owned a pet. I've not even been that much into animals. it's just something about the problem of, animal suffering that led me to sort of think, right, I want to write a book from how sort of Muslims would look at this issue. Because when I was thinking about it almost like 15 years ago, nearly a couple of decades ago, I never I hadn't seen anything written from a kind of philosophical, theological viewpoint. So I thought, right, I want to write something on this to see what Muslims had said about animal suffering. And then I was sort of you could say, sort of taken back by or hit by the problem of the biggest kind of the problem of evil, as we'll look at, is the problem of the problem of hell, the doctrine of hell. And anyone who's read the book will know that the largest two chapters, pretty much in my book, deals with animal suffering and the problem of hell. I think the problem of hell is probably the largest chapter in the book. And these two problems have perplexed me for a long time. And so I was quite fortunate that, AUC Press had allowed me to write, quite substantial chapters for both of these topics. I was really, really happy to write them, to put them in the book, and they made it into the final edit. So these two kind of problems led me to write the book and it taking the form that it did. And I'm in the future, to finish writing an entire monograph on the problem of hell. And I'll talk a bit about that chapter today. So those are my two motivations. And then there was, just to give you a bit of publication history, when I completed the first draft of the book and submitted it to AUC Press, the pandemic kicked in. And so we were gripped in a kind of COVID global pandemic. And I mention it in the footnote in the introduction that, this book has, was ready to be published, but it was delayed because of the pandemic. And so for those who asked, why didn't I address the pandemic in the book? It was just that the book had reached a stage where it was just not feasible to write a whole new chapter on how Muslims could address, how would Muslim theological thinking, philosophical thinking address the pandemic. So that's why I didn't make it into the book, even though the book was at the time, published at the time of the pandemic. Now, my book, very fortunately, has half a dozen chapters. So I have an introduction, like any book. I set up the problem of evil in terms of, what is it, and how it was conceived, not just within a sort of Islamic thought, intellectual thought, but within contemporary philosophy of religion. Because my book is the first, as far as I know, a book written in the approach of analytic theology. Now, analytic theology is the tools of analytic philosophy applied to theology. So analytic philosophy involves things like language, clarity, clarity of structure, logical structure, sort of kind of formal analysis. So the tools of analytic philosophy are then applied to theology, and then we have analytic theology. So my book is very much in that spirit. Though what I do mention at the end in the concluding remarks is, to what extent really can we address the problem of evil purely from this formal, very abstract philosophical perspective? And I intimate in my conclusion that perhaps we might be better served moving towards a less formal way of trying to address the problem of sentient suffering and looking towards other modes of explanation. And since the publication of my book, I have explored other avenues and other ways of trying to address the problem of evil. So in my book, I deal with something which hadn't been dealt with before in any substantial detail, and that is the problem of disability and suffering. Though others before me had mentioned it, Professor Ghali who's in Qatar, his book on disability and Islamic thought, was a landmark work. He mentioned some aspects of how Muslims looked at the idea of disability. I go further in my chapter, and I hope I've made a kind of substantive contribution to the discussion. I will talk about some solutions I mention in my book. Then I move on to the problem of animal suffering, animal pain and suffering. And then from that, I move on to something that's known as an evolutionary theodicy, and I'll talk about that in a second. As far as I know, again, there may be, I don't know everything or what everything that's written. I don't know anyone who has written on an Islamic evolutionary theory, evolutionary theodicy. I think my book was one of the first to include it from a philosophical, theological perspective. And then finally, perhaps the longest chapter in the book, I look at how could Muslims address the problem of hell. And since the publication of my book, I've been very fortunate. Many people have been engaging with what I've written in that chapter, some agreeing, some vehemently disagreeing. But the discussion has, it's provoked a lot of discussion and a lot of responses. So I'm very happy with that. I'm very happy with the response. Many people have emailed me over the past few years since the hardback was published, that they've really benefited from the book. It's on their reading list, it's on the university list. They've taken up the discussion, some of the thoughts and ideas and arguments in the book. So I couldn't ask. I'm delighted. Alhamdulillah, I'm delighted with the reception of the book. It's been very, very positive and critical. So with that sort of background sketched out, I want to sort of set up the problem of evil, kind of a standard, one way to conceive the problem of evil. And the reason why I choose this example from Al-Ghazali, the famous Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali, the reason why I choose him is that he constructs it in a very modern way. And then he says in this quote here, that he actually brings this discussion under the epithets, the divine epithets, the Asma'illah al-Husna, the most beautiful names of God. And he says, look, perhaps you might ask, لعلك تقول ما معنى كونه تعالى رحيما وكونه أرحم الراحمين والرحيم لا يرى مبتلى مضرورا ومعذبا ومريضا وهو يقدر على إماطة ما بهم إلا ويبادر إلى إماطته والرب سبحانه وتعالى قادر على كفاية كل بلية ودفع كل فقر والغمة وإماطة كل مرض وإزالة كل ضرر والدنيا طافحة بالأمراض والمحن والبلايا وهو قادر على إزالة جميعها وتارك عباده ممتحنين بالرزايا والمحن. Perhaps you might ask, he says, what does it mean to say God is the most, compassionate? He's the most intensely compassionate, and that he is the most, beneficent and merciful. And he sees that people are put under enormous trials. They are put under enormous harm, punishment, illness, and he is able to remove all of that. And someone of this kind of, with these kind of epithets and attributes, a being like this would want to remove all of these trials, tribulations, pain, torture, illness. He's powerful enough to do it. He's powerful enough to remove every difficulty, every pain, every poverty, every harm. Yet this world is replete with illness and tribulations and trials. He can remove all of them, but yet he leaves his servants. He leaves his servants stricken with these particular trials and tribulations, i.e., he can remove the pain and sentient suffering, but he doesn't. So Ghazali, I think, frames it in a way which is very modern, and this is the essence, the crux of the problem of evil. Why is it that a being who is most compassionate, loving, caring, who is most beneficent, maximally so, why would such a being leave his devotees to suffer to undergo such sentient suffering. Surely he would want to remove this sentient suffering. So that, in a nutshell, is what we would call in the mas'alatu shar, the problem of evil. Why is it that a benevolent being, compassionate being, an all-loving being would allow such suffering to occur in the world? So in that sense, Ghazali is very modern in how his framing of the problem is very, very, very modern. It's how we construct it pretty much in contemporary philosophy of religion. So it's that framing that I then set out to try and address in my book. And it's not a problem that's faced Muslims, of course. Their monotheist neighbors, Jews and Christians before them, had also grappled with this particular problem. So having set up the problem then, my aim in my book was, right, well, what are the different types of, suffering that people, or what people categorize as suffering? And then what kinds of answers can we give to address this particular construct of the problem of evil? I start straight away in my book with what is called in the literature, the disability and suffering. I try, I think, in the book to keep a sensitive tone as I could. And some people who have given me feedback on the chapter found it very, very heartening and really heartwarming, the kind of approach that I took in the chapter. I felt that this topic of disability has been really underrepresented in Islamic literature, contemporary Islamic literature. But anyway, what was one of the solutions that I was looking at from the Islamic perspective to address the problem of disability and suffering? So in a nutshell, the problem is, it's construed as persons with disability. How do they understand this disability? How do they understand this disability? Is it something that's to be understood as, let's say, there are a number of ways that you could that this issue has been looked at from the Islamic tradition. I chart it out in my chapter. Is this disability some kind of retribution? Meaning, is this suffering that's of disability something that is a form of punishment for some wrong, right? We find smatterings of that in the Islamic tradition. We do. Is the disability serving some greater good? What they call a greater good theodicy? Or is there something for us to learn from when it comes to persons of disability? So is there something that able-bodied persons is there something about them that can be improved in light of persons with disability? And this is what they roughly refer to as an educative theodicy. So the angle that I took in my book on this, when it comes to disability, is I tried to bring on ideas of hospitality within Islam. And what I tried to do is I tried to build on this idea of diyafa, hospitality, to show that the theodicy that I'm proposing is a kind of, how do we defeat the apparent constraints that come about with persons with disability? How do they overcome these challenges that they feel they have? And so my proposal here, which I feel is novel, although I've drawn ideas on two people's works. One is Mona Siddiqui's work on hospitality in Islam. She doesn't address the problem of evil with hospitality, but I draw on her research, and then I draw on some work that was done by Kevin Timpey and Aaron Cobb on disability theodicy and how to defeat it, how to overcome it. So the disability theodicy is based around how we, through through persons of disability, a Muslim can, can reach a certain realization of their own vulnerability. And by reaching a realization of their own vulnerability, by welcoming the person of disability through that prism of hospitality, one recognizes their own vulnerability, and then through that vulnerability channels love and compassion and care and concern deserving of persons of disability. So the persons of disability becomes the agent that educates the able-bodied person. And so the life of the able-bodied person is enriched by the disability in the person of disability. So disability is seen, I'm trying to flip the idea of disability into a powerful value. And so if we can only realize to see how powerful this value of disability is, we can become enriched by it. We become the host who welcomes the guest, the person of disability, and honors the guest. And that's where this idea of hospitality comes from, in pre-Islamic times and then through Islamic times. That's the idea I'm trying to draw on. But obviously, I conclude that the only way a person with disability, particularly horrendous disabilities that are cognitively degrading, ultimately only God can recompense what no person has ever seen or heard in the hereafter. No amount of temporal recompense can match what God has in store for persons of disability. So I was trying to thread in this chapter some current research at the time on hospitality in Islam and within philosophy of religion, and trying to weave that as a framework whereby the able-bodied person, under the framework of dhiafa, hospitality, welcomes the person of disability as an honored, valuable person from which to then learn and be educated, such that one realizes one's own vulnerability through that encounter. So that was what I was trying to get across in that chapter on disability theodicy. And since it's been written, other people have taken this chapter and taken it into other directions, which I'm very excited about. My next chapter was on the problem of animal suffering, and just recently I published an article in the Powergrave Handbook on the problem of animal suffering. I've written a chapter on Islamic theodicy regarding animal suffering. So anyone who wants to check out some of my further thinking on that can refer to that chapter entry. So here I try and address the problem of why would God allow animals to suffer? And then I sketch out some theological views. You have the views of the sort of Muslim rationalist, the Mu'tazila. They argue that God must compensate for any harm that he causes to sentient creatures like animals. And so if animals are harmed, God must compensate them. And so the divine has obligations. The divine has obligations. Other views are, well, there is nothing to explain about animal suffering because animals are a creation of God. God can really dispose of his creation as he wishes. There is no moral paradigm that God is beholden to. So God has no duties. Whereas the Mu'tazila view is that God acts according to a welfare model. So the divine action model is based on a welfare model. God only acts according to the best interests of his creation. Whereas the other view is that no, God can do as he wishes because he is the landlord of creation, and human and other non-human animals are sort of just tenants. And so God can do what he wants because he's the owner. And the owner has tasarrufat, the owner has absolute disposal of what the owner wants to do with whatever it is that they own. What I tend to do in my chapter is I suggest something called a mystery theodicy. I sketch some other theodicies as well, but the one that I sort of suggest at the end is a kind of mystery theodicy, and that is that ultimately we don't know why the divine would allow so much non-human animals to suffer in the way that they do. Of course, a mystery theodicy can be applied to anything, right? But I applied it to animal suffering as one approach amongst many that I discuss in my book. I can't go through it all because of time. So check that chapter out if you like. And then a follow-up from the chapter from my book is this new chapter that I've written on the problem of animal suffering in Islamic theology. I'm also working on a separate article chapter on it that looks at it more from the angle of animal psychology. So in my book, The Problem of Evil in Islamic Theology, I intimate towards animal minds and animal psychology, but I didn't have the space to develop it in the book. And this is what I'm hoping to do in the future. So animal psychology within Islamic thought and animal minds. Are animals minded creatures? And if they are, then what ultimately what kind of status does that give to animals? So that's that chapter there. And then I propose, for the first time, something that's known as an evolutionary theodicy. Now, the evolutionary theodicy, to understand what that means, how can we explain how God, what the evolutionary problem is, evolutionary problem of evil is, why would God allow the natural world, why would he allow evolution as a system in the natural world that brings about so much destruction? So you got animal predation, animals hunting other animals. You got disease and pestilence. You got extinction. You got wastage. What is it that makes this system? Why would God allow such a bloody system to take place? Why couldn't he brought about the animal kingdom, the animal world through some other system? And this is essentially the evolutionary problem of evil. Why is it that this Darwinian system, the system that Darwin explicated, why would God want to use that system to bring about the biological diversity that we see in the world? Now, I was treading on, like I said, new ground here. And so inevitably, some of it was going to be, a lot of it was going to be highly speculative. I'm not an evolutionary theist myself, but I was scanning in the literature, finding where were the evolutionary theists? Where were they? How come they hadn't written something on it? So I put in my book a suggestion on how could we explain why would God want to use the evolutionary system as opposed to some other system, right? And so I give some kind of how can we say, I give some kind of intimations as to how we can explain that. And in my other article published in Zygon, I give further theodicies, further ways of trying to explain why God would allow such suffering to occur in the natural world. So I propose an Islamic evolutionary theodicy, and again, there could be many reasons why God allows the natural order to come about like this. The answer that I intimate at the end of my chapter is perhaps the most commensurate system to allow the emergence, the evolutionary emergence of human beings, perhaps the system that will enable human beings to emerge, who are the primary unit of divine consideration, right? Human beings. That was not only possible, but perhaps one of the optimum systems to allow the emergence of the human species was the evolutionary system. That was the proposal that I gave in the book. So everything, you could almost say, was set up for the human species to emerge as the final steward of divine creation. Almost like the stage was being set for the entry of human beings to do what it is that they finally were created for or evolved for, depending on your perspective. So that was what I was suggesting in my book. Again, that's also had some critical reception. And then finally, the chapter that I looked at was the one that really, really, it got me the most, it was one of the most difficult to write, is the problem of eternal conscious torment, i.e., the creation of a real location in which there will be inhabitants, in unending conscious torment. Now, in the book, I boldly offer why such a place, there's no contradiction, there's no formal logical contradiction in the existence of a location of hell and an omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, holy, compassionate, beneficent being. And in that chapter, I set out a number of arguments why such a place is inevitable. So there is a logic to damnation. There is a logic to damnation. But in my chapter, I argue for a restricted view of hell. So only those inhabitants who are consciously, purposefully recalcitrant, who willfully deny God. And it doesn't matter how many times they'll be put in whatever situation, they would still willfully, deliberately, knowingly, obstinately reject God. The logic of that entails that if they don't want God, then the only logical outcome is separation from God. And separation from God is the domain of hellfire. That's one angle from the logic of damnation. And then the second angle is, just as we all have the right to vindicate ourselves, the divine has the right to vindicate himself. So to God's vindication of his own holiness entails that there just are individuals who just do not want, just do not desire, do not want God. And so for the divine to vindicate the divine, this is an outcome of it. So those are the kind of two sort of postures I take in my chapter after giving an extensive analysis of hell in the Islamic tradition. What some of the other views on hell are in the Islamic tradition? And since the chapter has been published, there's been intense critical engagement with it, which I'm very, very happy with. People vehemently disagreeing. That's kind of been the kind of general response, and that's good, and that's the way it should be. And so there are people pushing more for a kind of universalist position, the idea that ultimately everyone will be reconciled to God. Even Iblis, even Satan will be reconciled to God. There is there's going to be no more hell, i.e. hell after it served its purpose, i.e. to offer sanctions for whatever the punishment was. After it served its purpose, it will fold up, and then everything will be enveloped with a divine mercy. So this is a kind of universal salvation view. And so, yeah, whereas the view that I'm espousing is, not a universalist view. There will be inevitably some people that will remain in eternal conscious torment simply because of the willful rejection of God, and then God's divine, his divine vindication. So looking back over the book, and just wrapping up in a couple of minutes, after giving a long philosophical exposition of theodicies, so theodicies, if I didn't explain it at the beginning, are ways to explain why it is that God allows evil and suffering in the world. And what possible reasons can we give for why God would allow sentient suffering? These are known as theodicies in a broad way. So after giving this sort of philosophical account, heavily formal account, I do in my conclusion move towards a kind of different way of, addressing the problem of evil and looking at ways that are more pastoral, ways that don't rely heavily on sort of analytic machinery. They don't rely on analytic machinery like premise and conclusion, because if someone is suffering and then you say to them, I know why you're suffering. There's this logical syllogism that says, the major premise, the minor premise, and the conclusion. Here you go. I've solved your problem of evil. That's the intellectual dimension, right? But the thing that is that believers find most troubling is not necessarily the intellectual dimension. They may know that the premise is you can give a syllogism that shows it is logically compatible that that God is all powerful, all compassionate, all merciful, all loving, all knowing, and evil and suffering existing. These are logically compatible. Someone may accept that, but that doesn't solve the problem for them, if it indeed can be solved, meaning it doesn't ameliorate the suffering. So what I've been exploring recently, and I've published on this, is looking at how to make meaning out of suffering. In what is in Islamic scriptural, theological, spiritual resources can we draw on to construct meaning out of suffering? And so the analytical angle, the analytical approach is there as one approach, but is it the only approach? And in my conclusion, I push towards an idea of looking at other forms of theodicy, like compassionate theodicy. And so since my book, I've tried to take up the threads that I've mentioned in my conclusion in my further outputs and research. And so my book is really almost like, for myself, a kind of starting point that, has directed me to look at and explore further avenues related to the problem of evil. And so I want to conclude here, and I'm just so fortunate that AU had given me the opportunity to write the kind of book that I wanted, to add it to the small family of theodicists who have written on this topic. It's not an easy topic to write on, and no one wants to claim the title expert on evil, because I think that belongs to Satan. So, but writing on this subject, in ways that can help maybe allow others to better understand, but not come from the point of hubris to say what they've written is some kind of solution to the problem of suffering and evil, but rather just pointers to try and help people understand and make sense of this very, very complex topic. So I want to end there, and I want to thank you for tuning in, for logging in, for watching and listening, and I'm happy to take any questions and comments. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Safaruk. We've received a question from Yasmin Abdessalam. She's saying, I was wondering if you could elaborate more on the Islamic tradition's view of universal salvation.
Mm.
Find the idea of hell closing in on itself eventually quite fascinating. Could you point to thinkers who supported this view within the Islamic tradition, especially?
Okay. So in my book, there are two individuals who are attributed with holding this kind of view, and a full monograph on this will be coming out soon with the Center for Islamic Knowledge soon. The translation's been done, the study's been done, it's just being proofread, and it's on this very topic. So the universal salvation is this idea espoused by Ibn Taymiyyah and his student Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Again, there's some academic dispute about whether Ibn Taymiyyah held the view, but definitely he, it's there in his thought, and his student had extended his thinking even further. And it goes back to the idea of what do you understand God primarily to be? So for Ibn Taymiyyah, and again, I'm just putting it in a simple way, for Ibn Taymiyyah and his student Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, rahimahumullah, they felt that fundamental to God was mercy and wisdom. So God, and I call it that in my book, the mercy maxim, i.e., that is foundational for both. And the attribute of divine mercy and divine wisdom, divine mercy trumps it all. So what's the entailment from holding a maximalist position on divine mercy? Well, once hell serves its function, what's the purpose of having it? Just like someone, who served their sentence, it doesn't make sense. It's not wise. It's not compassionate to just continue punishing them when when punishment has served its purpose. So if punishment has served its purpose, if the sanction has been meted out for what it was, what's left? So that everything gets reconciled to God. And so in my book, my chapter, I mention extensively on it. And recently, a good friend of mine, Jamie Turner, has sort of pushed back on my view on hell in the book, and he's espouses in more stronger terms a universal salvation position. So he's written on that as well, Jamie Turner. So yes, Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah are two authors who stand, quite unique in holding this position about hell.
Well, Yasmin said, thank you for your answer, and that she's ordered the book of our AUC Press website. And that she's
Thank you.
sent it to
Thank
me.
you. Yes, I appreciate it.
That's always good to hear. Also speaking of hell, Deborah's is saying, I understand that the concept of hell has evolved over centuries in the Christian faith.
Yes.
Do you see a parallel in that respect with the Islamic traditions?
Yes. The Islamic tradition, if anyone has read the Quran or the prophetic sayings, it is, there's a lot that's written very descriptively about the location of hell, the nature of hell, the terrain, the sorts of horrors that will be in it. And so in the Islamic tradition, yes, the description of hell, what they call sifatun nar, the description of hell, are some of the most stark and some of the strongest that you would see. And so yes, and this is why when I was writing this chapter, just the vividness of the language itself is powerful. And so for Muslims, they believe it's a real place. There were groups of Muslims, thinkers and philosophers, who believed it was metaphorical. Just like in Christianity, the punishment itself isn't something physical or psychosomatic. It's not real. Rather, it's symbolic of, distance from God, estrangement from God, and things like that. But yeah, in the Islamic tradition, we have a strong parallel uh, on hell, definitely. But equally, there's also a strong emphasis on heaven as well. So kind of balance each other out.
Okay, we're receiving a lot of questions.
Hmm.
Um, okay, also a very long comment and two questions. Okay, so
Okay.
bear with me. Noura is saying, first of all, thank you for the order of presentation of this intriguing books. Two questions related to the problem of hell. Number one, when you build an argument based on hell being justified as a place for those who knowingly rejected God,
Yeah.
therefore must be separated from Him, what do you think of the meaning of knowingly? Because non-believers state that they don't believe in the existence of God. And how can we use the term knowingly when it's all a ghaib matter? Um, Also, there could have been another option, which includes separation from God too, which is for those non-believers to cease to exist in the afterlife.
Hmm. Let me take the second one first.
Okay.
The second one I address in my book, that's called the doctrine of annihilationism.
Mm-hmm.
Annihilationism is the idea that God just fluffs you out of existence. That's it. You're annihilated. You're dust, or you're not even dust. That's it. He just takes you out of wujud, out of being. And I some people have taken up this idea, but it was never laid out as a doctrine. The first time we found it was in my study on annihilationism. You won't find that doctrine anywhere. I construct it from the sources. So yes, there is that possibility, annihilationism. We do find it in contemporary Christian accounts of universalism and exclude, non-universalism as well. So yeah, that is an option, and some people are warming to that idea. But then the question becomes is one question you can ask is why is it better to annihilate someone and deprive them of existence, wujud, if you believe existence is a good thing? So there's some philosophical discussions that come about. And then the other point is it scripturally viable? Is that a viable hermeneutical position from the Muslim scriptures? So those are two issues on that second point of annihilationism. I think the first question says, what about this issue of knowingly?
Mm.
You can know things for certain that you've never seen, right? Anyone who studies epistemology and philosophy will tell you that. Anyone in science will tell you that we can know things for sure without ever seeing anything. It depends on what you understand evidence to be. Even though nobody has seen God, the question then is what is the evidence that there is such a being, even though we haven't seen such a being? And so this gets us to the idea of, into philosophy of religion, into what counts as evidence and what doesn't count as evidence. So the assumption in the Islamic tradition is that we can know things for sure about things that we haven't seen, just as with the degree of certainty as if we saw it with our own eyes. That could be through testimonial knowledge that's passed down from testimony to testimony, and that could be deductively.
Mm.
So I can infer that certain things exist without even me having seen the thing. Just like you have a mind, there are lots of things that I can deduce from certain evidences as they appear to me of an object that I don't have to see it. So there is that issue there. So knowingly here has a certain epistemological connotation. Unless we want to be a skeptic and say we can never really know anything for sure. And the reason why philosophers don't accept that is because how do I know the statement? We cannot know anything for sure. How do I know that for sure?
Makes
Can you
sense.
see? So we don't want to fall into that kind of skepticism because it cuts the branch that we're trying to sit on. So
Mm.
there must be some things that we know for sure. We just know it in a different way.
Interesting.
What was the other part of that question? Maybe I missed it.
No, there's an entirely other question, number two,
Oh,
which is, in your research, did you find that the universal salvation theory contradicts with Quran, particularly the ayat on everlasting pain? I think we kind of, yeah.
well, I think those who espouse, and I go through some of the Quranic exegesis in the chapter, those who espouse a kind of eternal view of hell, like conscious torment being eternal and forever and unending, they have a scriptural reading. Ibn Taymiyyah and his student, they also have a scriptural meaning, a reading of it that doesn't imply ila al-abad. It doesn't imply unending. Um, there's a duration to it. And so they bring some scriptural evidence for that, some statements of early religious authorities to back up that, and linguistic interpretation. So there is a hermeneutics around it. There is a hermeneutics around it. But as anyone who's familiar with this polemic will know, a very later erudite scholar, a Subki, really lambasts Ibn Taymiyyah and for taking this kind of hermeneutical stance. He believes that there's no possibility of having such interpretation. So it's all of this discussion will be coming out in a forthcoming monograph. So keep tuned. But you're right. The scripture seems to be very clear for many Muslim theologians and Quran commentators that doesn't admit of a different reading. So yeah, you're right to point that out. So they would say it contradicts scripture.
Mm. Um, okay, moving to Amira Biltagi, who is saying that going back to the start of the discussion with the Imam Ghazali's notion of why
Mm,
God, who is merciful, leave is subject to suffering, why he can elevate it. And
yeah.
in light of this discussion, what she got, and she wants to confirm if
Hmm.
this is what he meant, is that this is all for the greater good of serving those very subjects to evolve and learn, be it people with disabilities or suffering of animals, and the notion of evolution or believing in hell.
All right, that's not Ghazali himself giving those answers. Ghazali himself gives different answers. The answers that I give are the ones that you mentioned in the book. But if you want to know what Al-Ghazali said on these issues, um, he offers a number of ways to understand why there's evil and sentient suffering. For example, he mentions a greater good reason. So he says when we go and when someone operates on a limb or cuts a limb that's one of the most painful things. It's painful and it's wrong in Sharia and Islam. You're not allowed to harm
Mm.
any individual. You're not allowed to harm any limb and things like that. But if it's to save it from, poison or disease spreading, then it's better. That harm is better because it will prevent a greater harm. So they call that a greater good theodicy. So God may allow suffering to take place, which is adverse and bad, but for a greater good. He also gives the answer of what we call a contrastive theodicy. This means that to appreciate one thing, you are shown the opposite. So he says, how do you know that your siha, your health, is a good thing and a valuable thing? Is when you're ill.
Mhm.
How do you know wealth is a very important and valuable thing? When you're in poverty. So similarly, um, God gives a suffering in a way to show us, well, what about when you're in good times, the gratitude, the thankfulness, all that kind of thing God wants to bring out by putting suffering and evil in the world, that kind of contrast. And he gives several others, by the way, but those are just two that he himself gives. But the ones that you mention, these are the ones that I explore in the book. Yeah, yeah.
Amira, please buy the book and read it. Uh, Another question, which is quite interesting, by Brenda. It seems that by everything you have said here, that Islam would oppose capital punishment. Can you comment
Oh,
on
oh.
that?
This question takes us into the intersection of Sharia, of law and ethics. Um, so
That needs
the,
another book completely.
yeah, the standard pre-modern position for anyone who studies fiqh and Sharia will know that the standard pre-modern legal position on these kinds of sanctions, like hudud, we call them in Islam, is that a certain crimes result in the forfeiting of your life, meaning it's a life for a life. Of course, there is the the issue of pardoning as well. There is that option in Sharia where you can pardon a person and get some kind of compensation in return. But yes, most of the pre-modern views you'll find the consensus has always been that yes, that a life is forfeited for a life. Some modern ulama, like from Al-Azhar and others, have also said that, they've interpreted these rulings in different ways. Obviously, that's going to require us to go into the legal hermeneutics. We don't have time. But yes, you're right. That is a majority position within Islam, that capital punishment is a form of punishment. And in fact, many have argued from the basis of maslaha for it, like there's a benefit in having such punishments. But that's a different discussion from theodicy, and that takes us into law and ethics.
Okay. Someone also is trying to ask question, not necessarily relevant 100% to the presentation, but Dalia is saying it's very courageous, first of all, to attempt and to actually write such a book.
Oh, thank you.
But she's asking, would you kindly explain the difference between Muslim jurisprudence and Sufism?
Very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Masr, Egypt is a land of Sufism, but so jurisprudence is a broad term that means knowledge of legal rulings. So it can mean two things: knowledge of legal rulings, what we call علم الأحكام الشرعية العملية, and then the other meaning can be legal theory, what we call usul al-fiqh, like how do I interpret law? What theory am I bringing? So if you mean jurisprudence, knowledge of law, positive law, that could be one meaning. The main English meaning of jurisprudence is Islamic legal theory. What methodology am I taking to understand the Quran and the Hadith? How am I interpreting it? This is called jurisprudence. And Sufism, tasawwuf, is how do I purify my internal self? So my acts that are internal to me that you cannot see, like my intention, my niyyah, how much sincerity do I have towards something? These are not physical things that you can see. So how do I address my internal states, my ahwal? How do I address them? This is what the science of tasawwuf is supposed to be about. How can I better myself as an individual, cultivate virtues, akhlaq, cultivate proper codes, adab, and things like that. And that, by the way, that falls under the Sharia as well. Because in Islam, the spirituality falls under law. So, yeah.
Okay, I think we could take one last question. Yasmin again is asking, I'm wondering if there are echoes of Jewish theodicies within the Islamic tradition, especially soul-building theodicy, I think. Saadiya,
Saadi al-Fayyumi.
yeah, Jaoun was a huge champion of it. I'm sorry if I mispronounced.
I think you're referring to Saadi al-Fayyumi, Saadi of Goan, the great Iraqi Egyptian, Jewish a rabbi. One of my favorites, by the way. He wrote in both Hebrew and in Arabic. But he was a Iraqi, ثم كان مصريا. So he was he settled in Fayoum. So yeah, he definitely Saadi was living at a time under the Abbasid Khilafah at the time, the ruling at the time, and so much of his theology was influenced by the Mu'tazila, the rationalist theologians, you could say. And so, yes, some of the things that he mentions about soul building and that God put suffering and evil in the world to make us better individuals. In my book, I mention that this is the view of Imam al-Maturidi,
Mm.
a Central Asian Sunni scholar who talks about that. Why does God put us under, like when you put something in the furnace, the fire to purify it? This is what God is trying to do with balaya, mihan, ibtila, ikhtibar, all these things. These tests are supposed to make us better. So yes, definitely, and check out Saadia Fayoumi, great scholar. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, we can go on forever. I personally have so many questions. Um, but I mean, we need to have more events and more books like this. The topic I feel like people are very interested to know more and learn more. So just like hopefully your next book, we could also promote it to our list who are
Of
interested about the
course.
topic. But I mean, 1 hour is never enough for sure.
I want to thank
Um,
you, yeah, for it, Susan. Yourself, everyone's been so wonderful with their questions, complex questions, engaging, thoughtful, brilliant, and yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you.
we have Yasmin also asking if they can email you with more questions.
طبعا. Yeah, yeah, not a problem at all.
I have
Yeah, yeah.
permission now. Okay, sure. I'm gonna reach out to Yasmin. I'm sure I'm gonna find it in the registration. But I just want to say thank you so much, Safaruk, for your time and effort and thought that went into the book, but also for this very insightful conversation and discussion of the contents of your book. And I also want to thank everyone who joined us and took the time of the day to listen and ask very engaging questions. And I want to remind you again that the book Islamic Theology and the Problem of Evil is available worldwide through major bookstores and online book retailers if you'd like to purchase a copy and read it. And you'll also find it on aucpress.com. You find all of the links. And I hope to see you and our upcoming virtual events. Stay tuned to AUC Press, and the recording of this wonderful discussion is going to be uploaded very shortly to our YouTube channel, AUC Press. So,
Brilliant.
Farouk, any last words you'd like to say before?
No, well, again, thank you, Susan. You and the team, again, it's been wonderful. And I'm really glad to be part of the AUC Press authors, and so it's been fantastic. And yeah, I want to thank you all for joining. Special love to those who are tuning in from Egypt. Very, very special place for me. Wallahi. So it's yeah, I hope to see you all on the next virtual book talk as well. And inshallah, it's been, we'll see you all on the circuit.
I hope to
Bismillah.
see you in Egypt soon as well,
Inshallah.
Farouk.
Definitely.
بلدك التاني. But also very interesting comment that we just received in the last minute that really
Mm.
touched my heart from Valerie Pedrick, who says, as someone who knows almost nothing about Islam, I have found this fascinating. Thank you.
Oh,
So
thank you,
means a
Valerie.
lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you all. Alf shukr. Wallah, alf shukr. I can't wait to be back in Egypt.
Inshallah,
Inshallah.
very soon. Thank you,
Thank you so much.
everyone, and have a lovely rest of
Thank
the
you.
day. Thank you.
Thank you. مع السلامة. مع السلامة.
السلام
شكرا.
عليكم. مع السلامة.
في أمان الله. السلام عليكم.